Amir has to think. Huh?
Yeah.
That's
Pick
that's
one.
probably the toughest question in the
Yeah.
podcast.
There's this fear that you're going to break stuff. So one of the challenges around non-human identity is understanding that context, understanding what that identity is used for, who would be ultimately responsible for it, so you can figure out when and how you can make changes to it without impacting production.
Welcome to The Elephant in AppSec, the podcast to explore, challenge, and boldly face the AppSec elephants in the room. I'm Alexandra, your host, joined by my amazing co-host Tristan, a former security engineer and co-founder of Escape. Welcome to today's episode. We have two incredible guests with us, Andrew Wilder and Amir Shaked. Andrew is the retained Chief Security Officer at Community Veterinary Partners and a former Regional CISO for Nestle, where he spent 18 years shaping cybersecurity across the Americas, Asia, and Europe. Amir is the VP of Research and Development at Oasis Security, specializing in non-human identity management. With a background in software development, Amir transitioned to cybersecurity, contributing to companies like PerimeterX and Human and R&D and Engineering. Both Andrew and Amir are passionate about sharing their expertise. Andrew teaches cybersecurity at Washington University in St. Louis and serves on its board, while Amir coaches engineering managers at GrowthSpace. They frequently speak at conferences and on podcasts, helping others learn from their extensive experience. In February, the Cloudflare breach highlighted the critical risks of managing non-human identities. Today, we'll explore this fascinating topic with Andrew and Amir, discussing why these breaches occur, the main risks involved, and the anticipated proliferation of non-human accounts. We'll also delve into the challenges of understanding the context around non-human identities. Dive right in! Hi, Andrew. Hi, Amir. I'm very excited to have you today with me on the podcast. So it's the first time I'm doing the podcast with the two guests in the audience. So I'm very excited about the format like this for the first time. And today is the main topic is this non-human identity management. So it's very interesting topic for me, especially like with the report that we've released several months ago as well on this topic that I actually worked on my side too. So. And I think this year it was also a big topic because of the Cloudflare breach that like everyone has been talking on, on social media, on LinkedIn. I've seen like so many posts about it, like a lot of content, like a lot of descriptions. Everyone has an opinion, I'll be curious to know your opinion as well. And so this breach, I think it exploded like multiple unrelated and exposed secrets, and it all started with Okta breach, like back at the end of 2023. So remember, where like Cloudflare attempted to rotate all the credentials within Okta, but they were aware of the breach, and they actually did not execute like solution for that in the right time frame. So I think like the questions that I had, like where does responsibility lie in your opinion for their like failure and to rotate all the credentials?
Yeah. I can take a stab. So it's actually an interesting topic because in one way, if you think of it, Cloudflare did a good job. They went and they manually started to rotate like 5,000 different secrets, which is a lot of manual work, and it's very complicated to do that. And they just missed 4 because they thought they weren't used, as far as we understand from what they shared. So they thought there are 4 which are not relevant, and it's very hard to get the context. It's part of the challenge with non-human identities to understand the context of how they're used. So they swapped all of them. They missed 4, and those 4 were actually used to breach and create a takeover attack. Basically, the attackers utilized some of these missed keys, and they breached Cloudflare production, gained access to their Atlassian server and Jira and Confluence. So, in a way, the blame, to answer your question, the blame here is it's multi-part. First, actual reliance on the IDP, Okta in this case, and they were breached and caused the exposure. So obviously they have a big part of it. And the second is what kind of controls and practices we actually have in place to manage these identities, and do we manage them? And in a way, it exposes the gap of how non-human identities, also sometimes called like workload or machine identities, are actually not being managed, which creates this complicated process. So a lot of people to blame potentially, but as an industry, like we're not mature enough to address this properly today.
Yeah, I'd like to pull out one key phrase that Amir said, where he was talking about the contextual challenge. So as a practitioner, when you're trying to fix all of your non-human identities, cybersecurity also has a mantra of don't break stuff, right? We're trying to do cybersecurity at the speed of light, let the business continue to operate. And if you're going and rotating passwords for things that might break some business critical application, there's this fear that you're going to break stuff. So one of the challenges around non-human identity is understanding that context, understanding what that identity is used for, who would be ultimately responsible for it, so you can figure out when and how you can make changes to it without impacting production.
And do you think this context should be understood like in an automated way, or it should be like somehow documented beforehand, or what is your opinion there?
When you're talking about a large enterprise, the only way to do it is in an automated way. I mean, I came from a company with 300,000 people, 13,000 applications, hundreds of thousands of non-human identities. There's no way to do that in a manual way. Now, if you have a small company with 100 people or 500 people and you have 5 apps and you know where all the non-human identities are, maybe you can do it in a manual way. You're probably not doing a very good job of it, but maybe you could. But when you start to get to large enterprises, the only way to do it is in an automated fashion.
And what do you think are the biggest challenge in like understanding context in an automated way? Because business logic of applications of tokens, like of anything within the specific company, understanding is extremely hard. So what challenges do you see there?
It's a good question. Part of the challenge comes from the fact that most of the ability to build those applications today is very democratized within the organization. So you have multiple tools, multiple identity providers, secret providers that you can use. And you can't really force the organization, especially a big organization, you can't force them to just work with one tool or one way. It just won't work, because that will hurt the ability to deliver and actually build stuff. A good way to solve it in many cases with identity is to start with understanding the scope of where you're at, what's the starting stand, and the identity posture in a way. And from there, creating the processes and controls to continuously improve and reduce the gap of where you're at currently. And almost always you'll have some kind of gap to a place of the ideal of 100% control. And it's really hard. Even if you think of just regular human identities, it's hard to get to full 100% control. So it's even harder, but the better you get it, the less risk you're creating.
Yeah, I would really agree with what Amir said. I think you're never going to get to 100%. And I think one of the things that an automated solution for non-human identity can do is it can help to point out the priorities of the things that you need to address. Because all cybersecurity teams, no matter the size of the organization, they're all strapped for resources. And so if you try and go address non-human identity today, what are you going to tackle first? Which ones are you going to look at first? So an automated solution can help you to call out, here's the riskiest ones, here's the biggest risk that you have, go and fix these today. And then once you've got those, then you can come back and we'll give you some more to do. So it's that not only the automation piece, but also the automation and prioritization that helps you focus your finite resources where they need most.
And do you think
I really like I really like the context of the priority as part of the automation. I think it's an excellent thing to point out. One example would be, off-boarded employees. You have an employee that was exposed to secrets of identities and now either moving the department or leaving the organization. And if he was exposed, or they were exposed to some identity secrets close to before they left the organization, those would be the highest priority to rotate. And that creates its own challenge that we can talk about of how you actually do that. But those would be like top priority for you as an organization to protect and rotate.
Yeah, that sounds actually quite challenging to also understand the priority, because I think automated solutions, they help you to prioritize, but they don't, again, if we come back to like business logic, how business operates, they don't know like the internal priorities, I would say, or business priorities. So I think kind of have to always find this balance, the right balance to do things, right?
Yeah, the prioritization conversation is a controversial one. Right, so that you have to be able to put in, as you said, business context, but on the same side, from a company that's automating non-human identity management, they can give you the context of here's the ones that have the biggest problems. Like Amir was talking about, awkward employees who are exposed to secrets. That's one of the risks, and you can marry those two things together, where you can say, look, here's my crown jewel applications. Tell them all the identities that are tied to this, and you can focus on those first. But at the same time, they can give you additional telemetry or context to say, here's the riskiest ones that are exposed, or some on the left that have them, or whatever the other reasons are to prioritize. And you kind of marry those things together and find your top priorities.
And I feel like take a step back, maybe a little bit, because we're now like at that, though, like that in a conversation, like what are actually non-human identities, because we have like different types of listeners on the podcast. Like if one of you can, can give a brief definition on this topic.
Well, Amir, if you're okay, I'll take a crack at it, and then Amir is much more experienced in this than I am, so he can fill in the details. So if you think about identity, you have what we commonly refer to in the industry as birthright accounts. So whatever my Andrew.Wilder@company.com, that's my birthright account, or an administrative account that's tied to my name. Those are what we call birthright accounts. Those are tied to me. I take responsibility for those. Non-human identities are anything that's not a birthright account. So it's an API key, it's a shared secret, it's a generic account, a service account, a test account, anything that's not a regular person's account. And that's what they are. And the thing that we're talking about, I think, today is more, how do we control those things? Because I think we have a fairly good handle, and it depends on the maturity of your organization, but I think we have a fairly good handle today on how to manage birthright accounts. It connects through HR, there's automation, you use the tools that are available today. But the problem is, and Amir alluded to this earlier, is in our industries now, we have a lot of different solutions to manage these non-human identities, and there's no overarching solution that's looking at it across the enterprise to be able to see risks to help prioritize. So that's what they are, and a little bit about the challenges of controlling them today. Amir?
Yeah, I think it's a great way to look at it, Andrew. I would also add that from the purpose point of view, so all those non-human identities are basically a way to facilitate communication between machines or services or applications, and usually designed to automate tasks and processes rather than represent an actual individual user. And it comes into play both in the differences in the authentication mechanisms, where you're using certificates or API tokens or cryptographic keys. You don't have an MFA, for example. So there are a lot of major differences between those types of identities across the stack, and the purpose, and the authentication, in how you manage the access control. Usually they're long lasting. Most organizations don't deprecate those identities, and the entire lifecycle management of them is handled differently. And the scopes, it's in most of the systems, it's managed differently. So in many ways, it is an identity in the organization, but everything around it is different.
Yeah.
There are more of those, and from authentication to purpose to all the mechanisms around it, it's being used completely differently.
I think, yeah, I totally agree with you that depending on organization, it's very, very different. The way you do it, it can start with just like a list of a Google sheet of tokens to actual like advanced solution. I've seen a lot of different things. And one of the reasons that I was super excited about this topic is because like a couple of months ago, I collaborated on a research topic that we run internally, where basically we published a report where we discovered like 18,000 exposed tokens in the front end. I don't know if you've heard about it, and some of them were given access to like GitHub Lab tokens, like OpenAI tokens, or AI tokens as well. And one of them was also Stripe. Like one token was basically $70 million. So when you discover it being exposed, that's huge, risk for organization. And then we published the report, and was distributed in a lot of different places. So and on podcasts as well. And do you think in research like that, especially maybe for you, Amir, since you work in research and development, do you think that would actually drive companies to think about managing better their the security of their tokens and API keys, or they just read because now it's a hype and they'll forget about it?
So I think any such report, and that's a really, really good analysis, and any such report is good for increasing the understanding of the scope of the problem and the risks. From my experience, there are two main drivers to help convince people that something is an actual problem they need to deal with. One is research like this that are highlighting the magnitude of the problem, the magnitude of the risk, and how complicated it is, and that you have to deal with the challenge. And the other is regulation and compliance. And you should consider some of the new updates with PCI. It's actually tying into the need to rotate service accounts, for example. So it's not addressing the whole scope of the problem of managing NHI, but it is touching on a very specific topic which is related. So in a way, both of these from both angles is increasing the awareness to the magnitude of the problem and the fact that you have more and more non-human identities, and the move to the cloud and modernization of how applications are built, and with more tools from no code automated applications are only increasing at a rapid pace. So we do see an increase in the magnitude of number of identities, non-human identities, and correlate to that the interest to address that risk and try and let's call it fix the problem or reduce the risk, because there is always a risk. That's the thing with identities. So it's reducing the risk and the threat level.
I'd like to add two things to Amir's list of the two drivers to convince. So the first one I agree is research. I know about a problem. I see that it's out there. I put it on my roadmap. I put it on my budget. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to RFP. I'm going to find something to fix my solution. And the second one, definitely regulation. I would even add regulation and cyber insurance, because cyber insurance questionnaires now are starting to ask you about your non-human identity accounts, how you're managing that kind of stuff. The third one I would say is that you have a cybersecurity incident. Okay, let's say you're a cloud player or somebody like that who's recently had an incident where someone pivoted inside your organization, they took over a non-human account and they started doing bad stuff with it. In that case, money opens up and you develop an immediate understanding of the problem and you start to go and find solutions for it. And the fourth one is a recommendation. So if other CISOs are talking about non-human identity and they're saying, hey, what are you doing to address this? What are you doing to address this? And they all start saying, hey, this is a new topic that we're working on. Then that recommendation that starts to build and other people start to get on board with it as well. So I think those are kind of the four ways to convince, and I just wanted to add to Amir. I like that.
And if you're speaking about regulations, I think in regulations it's the government that plays a very important role sometimes as well. So how do you think the whole maybe industry or the organization should collaborate with the governments on this topic to actually maybe either reinforce the regulations and for non-human identities?
Well, so as Amir pointed out, regulations do drive some of this stuff, and the government is not behind all of the regulations. There's a lot of industry-specific regulations, like banks have their own regulations and healthcare has their own regulations. So it's what you see happen over time is a gradual maturity that goes through all of these things. So through research, through regulations, through public incidents that are being exposed, through sharing between cybersecurity professionals know what they're seeing. So I think that as we continue to collaborate on this topic, we'll see regulations catch up. Some are faster than others, and you'll see kind of the whole industry rise to a maturity level in this key area.
When do you think would actually rise to the maturity level on this area in the industry?
I'm going to let Amir answer that one. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of several years, and you can look at the time it took the industry to mature on human identities and to get to a level of, if an organization wants to work and operate on human identities in a secure and organized way, so they have almost all of the tools today. Maybe some are very expensive, but they all have all of the tools today to manage that. So there is the capability. So learning from that and the state of where things are, I think it's a couple of years that we're going to see this. It's not something that's going to be solved in a matter of months. It's several years.
Okay.
Both for the industry to understand how to solve it best, and also organizational changes of like how the organization is changing the way they work between identity team, the cloud security team, and the AppSec teams to collaborate around that, versus what we have today that is depending on the organization and their state, but sometimes it's completely disconnected. Then you have an AppSec team that doesn't think in the context of identities. They just want a secret to manage, but they're not thinking about the identity they created in the context of managing it and rotation and lifecycle management, just deploy to production. So that's also a level of maturity that needs to change in the organizations.
I like that Amir more than once has hit on the process and organizational aspect of this type of change. It's more important than we realize. A lot of cybersecurity practitioners and teams, they want to go out and they want to buy the best tool to fix the thing. And tool is great. Don't get me wrong. We need a tool to address this, but there's a big part of organizational change around this. And especially when you talk about non-human identity, it touches application security, touches all other types of identity. And so making those organizational changes and the process changes around how to manage it, that's a key part of making this a success.
And organizational changes, they do not happen overnight. It takes time. So how would you actually recommend someone, what steps they should take to achieve, that necessary maturity in several years, or that actually even start the organizational change? Should it be top down, bottom up? It's a long journey.
Well, I think what Amir said earlier was understanding the scope. A lot of people ask, CISOs, what keeps you up at night? And for me, the answer to that question, and I think many of my peers would agree, is the risks that you don't know about, right? The risks that I know about, at least I have controls for those, I have plans, I have roadmaps, and doing something to address. But those things that I don't know about, that's what really concerns me. So I think the first thing that you want to do is get out in your organization and understand how many non-human identities you have, what kind of sources they're coming from, what sort of risks are associated with them, and then you can start to make informed decisions about how you're going to address that type of risk. But the first step is you need to understand it. You need to see what's up.
So I guess what you mean is first to build the comprehensive list and inventory of all the potential non-human entities that your organization can have, what their business definitions that are associated with that, where they're used, and etc. Right?
Well, I think you're going into step 2, which is more understanding how they're used. I think the first step is understand what's out there. Then you can start to try to understand what's used if you want to use the business prioritization approach, which we talked about. But that would be my first step, to seeing how big the risk is for you and your team.
Yeah, and if I'm tying it back to what you asked, I think it's mostly going to be top down, because it starts with understanding that there is a risk to address. And if you want to drive an organizational change and find a solution to a complicated problem, you're probably going to see top down as some kind of a directive that this is a risk we need to address. This is something we want to solve within the organization. And you might find pockets within the organization where we've solved it extremely well locally. But as a whole, I see it coming top down as something to address. And obviously, products that are going to mature and new tools and, some thought leadership and practices around it will help organization understand what would be the best way to address this.
And when would you define that as a priority? Because you said there can be so many things that you don't see yet, not only as a non-human identity management problem, but there are so many things in the security. When would you say, okay, now that's a top priority for us?
Well, I think it goes back to those 4 things that we talked about before. Number one, are you seeing this in your roadmap and your risk assessment and your pen test? Are you seeing this as a big outlier for your organization? Are you seeing regulations in your industry or from your government that are requiring this, or from your cyber insurance provider? Have you had some kind of an incident in the past or recently that has involved non-human identities? Or are you hearing a lot of talk about it from your friends, your trusted advisors, people like that? So I think those are the things that kind of rise those areas to a priority.
And do you think also within the organization, if there is a research team that brings something like this to you, would you listen to them as well? Or
Well, I'm biased. I think we should address this, right now. So
yeah,
I think the answer. I think the answer is yes. If you have a research team that their goal is to find what are the risks that we're not looking at, and it could be a research team, it could be an enterprise risk management team. You could be running a NIST or a ISO or whatever program, and you start to look at your risks, and you put non-human identity on there. You do the risk assessment. You realize, hey, we've got a big risk here, and you start to look to address it. I think if those things bubble up, if you're making the right kind of decision, you need to take a look at it. At least you need to understand how big of a problem it is so that you can make an informed decision about how to address it.
And I think in every company, the understanding how big is the problem is going to be different, and actually it's going to depend also, I think, on the size of the company, because depending on the size, the priorities are going to be different as well. So yes, either it's just put this somewhere over the fire, or actually having a roadmap in the next 2 years as well. That's very different depending on the size. I think you actually work both in a different companies of a different size, so it's interesting to know both of your perspective. Like you, Andrew, worked at Nestle for more than 18 years, so big global company, everyone knows. So with a complex infrastructure, so many things, so many variables to take into account. And I guess you plan your roadmap well in advance.
Yeah.
So how did you actually, how do you think the non-human identity management will be different, your case versus your case, Amir? So I would really like to know your views on that.
Well, I'll start. So, at Nestle, I worked on human identity since the beginning of my career there. So, most of that 18 years, there was a lot of work on human identity and automating it and making it work well through HR actions and things like that, and getting that under control. Now, that did include some level of work on non-human identity. So service accounts, generic accounts, test accounts, things like that, things that are in your Active Directory, those we started to control better and better as we introduced the control stone. But I think what we're talking about a lot here are API keys, shared secrets, other things like that. And in those cases, you have those with AppSec teams. Those are in those secret lockers and repositories. And at one point, Nestle had about 13,000 applications. So if you think about that across 160 different countries and 300,000 employees, the ability to manually control all of those non-human identities is impossible. So you need to introduce some kind of automation. You need to find a way that you can have a central point of reference to those things and be able to control them. And I think the human identity providers today are not able to do that. At least there's none that I know that are able to do that. And Amir says they are very expensive, which is true. So unless you have a big security budget, you won't be able to afford them. But even if you can afford them, you're still not able to address those things that we have today. So there's a gap there. There's a challenge.
Yeah, I would add to that past decade I worked at smaller companies, startups, so up to 500, 600 employees at a point. You approach it differently, but the pace of introducing new applications, new tools is very fast. So another way I thought about your question would be the age of the company. Like where I work today, it's a much newer startup, so we have more modern tools to build things properly from the get-go. Previous place, when it started, some tools weren't there. So, you have legacy. Even 7 years ago, you'll find yourself with some things that were built perhaps in an incorrect way and should be resolved because the tools were non-existent. So the age of the company is also very relevant, and any company that exists over 10 years probably has some gaps in how they manage and control those, simply because the practices and the tools weren't there.
It's very
a good point,
interesting. I
Amir.
think
The
yeah.
older and larger that the company is, the more legacy you have, the more chance that you have risky non-human identities that you don't know about or you're not controlling well.
So you think, say, the companies that will be created in a couple of years, when like maybe they achieve maturity in the industry, they're not gonna have any problems at all.
Maybe.
Probably, yeah. Same with same with human
cross the
identities.
fingers.
No, but it's a good question in terms of like human identities. A company that starts today, are they going to create good practices around human identities? In many respects, much better, because even if they want to apply to PCI and SOC 2 and other compliance programs, those already direct you to manage it better. So you're at a much starting point just to be able to do business.
Yeah, it makes sense. And do you think, like, since last year, like since end of 2022, the AI was like a huge thing, and now we've seen like within 1 year and a half how many actual tools were created, just that say like, yeah, it's AI based, and then in the end sometimes it's just like a ChatGPT wrapper or something like that. So do you think AI, will contribute a lot to management of non-human identities?
Although I think
I think it's going to add a lot of challenges. Some of this is like a philosophical question. Is an agent a human or a workload identity? Like, how do you manage their secrets? And from what context are you doing? Are you inheriting the user who is actually using the system, or is it an application to application? But in many ways, it's only accelerating the use of non-human identities. More applications, more automation, more tools, which have some human interaction, but behind the scenes, you actually have, a lot more applications being created and a lot more non-human identities being created and that needs to be managed with some more complicated level of control of what type of data can they access and how do you not break the production. The context might be a lot more complicated if you're trying to consider also the models behind the scenes. And that's going to be an interesting
discussion.
An interesting discussion.
Yeah, it goes back to something we were talking about at the beginning about the business context. The more integration you have using non-human identities, the more complicated it is to understand, and the more necessity you have to have an automated solution to make that understanding.
And do you think like research, especially like for you, Amir, in the research and development, is it one of the topics that you work on? For example, just curious, since you work like in a company that like basic that automates like AI-driven business processes for automation for like growth of non-human identities and life cycle management of non-human identities. Is it actually like one of the topics that you work for in a research part?
On generative AI and how it comes into play. It's one of the things we were looking at, but surprisingly, a lot of the current challenges in this field are many legacy areas as well. So we are looking into that as an area that's being, evolving and changing. But many of the gaps that we're seeing right now and are, working our way to improve the posture and lifecycle management are on existing legacy systems. The gap is there for a lot of things already.
Shadow IT.
Shadow IT and like the example I gave at the beginning, like the off-boarded employee and the context. So there is a lot of AI in the sense of how you make the product the best or trying to understand it. But there are a lot of interesting questions. How do you know that you can improve or rotate an identity without breaking production?
And do you have an answer on this question?
On how to do it?
Yeah.
Well, either do it really, really good from the get-go, or find the tool that will help you do it.
Yeah, so it's basically like the efficiency of the tools that you have in your AppSec tool stack, like a new security tool stack in general. Do you think one tool is something that would solve all the problems, or you actually need like a combination of the different tools?
That's a really good question. If you think about even the tools that help you manage human identities today, there isn't one tool that you're using. You have different tools for different, types of problems, from IGA and PAM and the IDP. So in this context as well, like you want a secret manager. There are different types of secret managers out there. You don't want to limit the application security team or the engineering team in being able to use only one secret manager because, they have their pros and cons. So I don't think there is one tool to solve everything. It's a combination. The IDPs, they're part of it. No reason to go try to replace them. It's how you work with them and all the other tools within the sphere to create a better process of control and management.
Yeah, and
So I don't think there is like one.
Magic
If you're
wand.
going back to the thing we talked about a couple of times around process and organizational change, the easiest way to make these organizational changes is to be tool agnostic, right? To allow things to work with whatever kind of tool that you're using, whatever secret manager that your dev team or engineering team wants to use, because it's a lot easier to do that and say, we're going to force you to start using this secret manager that only works with this code language or what have you. So you have to be application agnostic or secret manager agnostic, if you will, in this case, to be able to introduce those changes.
So I think like on the podcast, we talked about different things like organizational culture that you just mentioned, automation, research, like so many different things. And that you actually have to know as well how to operate as a security professional. So there are a lot of people that are just starting as a security professional, and for like on a podcast I quite often ask that question for like a newbies in security, or for someone like a young who's just starting, what skills should they focus on if they want to get better in that area? Do you think it's more like understanding how it works, like even let's say they built basically the list of what they have of all the risks, but then if they want to improve, what should they work on, like soft skills or hard skills to like technically understand how it all works?
I would always start, the hard skills are always a critical part of it. If you want to be good at understanding the mechanics of how something operates, like in this context, I would say build an application, try to use a secret manager, try to use a cloud provider, try and do those things to understand like what is this context of identity, where it's coming from and everything. So it won't just be buzzwords, like see it and feel it and try to use the tools. From my experience in security, the ability to rally people and talk to them and convince them that what you're trying to solve is important, and getting their feedback on something, or the soft skills are really important at any stage of your career, and especially if you're just coming in. That would help you to just to get the coach and to get coaching and get feedback and just understand where you should focus on and improve faster. So the hard skill is something you can do at home on a computer. The soft skill is something you need to practice on, like working and talking to people. Yeah, you need to talk to people. It's the same thing. You need to practice, but you have to practice it with people.
I love what Amir said about soft skills. I don't generally give that advice, but it's really good advice. I normally give two pieces of advice. The first one is look at all the areas of cybersecurity. Many people, when they start out in cybersecurity, they want to be a SOC analyst or a pen tester. And those are great things. We need SOC analysts and pen testers, don't get me wrong, but go look at everything else. Go look at asset management, look at identity management, look at GRC, disaster recovery. Set yourself apart by doing something different than the majority of the people that are trying to get entry level, especially if you find those areas interesting, because we certainly need people in all of those areas too. And the second thing is about experience. There's a chicken egg scenario with getting a job in cybersecurity. Most entry-level jobs require multiple years of experience. Well, how do you get experience without a job, and how do you get a job without experience? So it's kind of stuck there. So my advice is get experience in any way that you can, whether it's projects that you work on in school, things that you do to volunteer for, local nonprofits or small businesses in your community, getting an unpaid internship, getting a paid internship if you can, or an apprenticeship. These are great ways to get experience. It will help you not only with the hard skills, but also the soft skills that Amir talked about. I think those are great ways to try and build your experience and show that you've made an effort to do something. Maybe you haven't had a job as a cybersecurity analyst already, but you've done a lot of stuff around that, and you understand how to work with people, and you understand the hard skills as well. So those are my two pieces of advice.
Very interesting. And the last question that I always ask, what's your book advice for the audience? Because Andrew already talked a little bit about it, and I think you recommended like cybersecurity.
I already did you find the book that I recommended to you?
Yeah, I ordered for the office. I haven't read it yet.
Okay.
But,
so I'll give my recommendation first. I'm very interested to hear what Amir's going to say, but my recommendation is Rick Howard's book, Cybersecurity First Principles. We all have heard for many, many years about the CIA triad, and Rick takes the CIA triad and he throws it out the window and says we need to try something else, which is to reduce the probability of a material impact to our organization due to a cyber event in the next X number of years, 3 years or something like that. And that's his first principle. And then everything we do builds on that thing. So it's a really great book. It talks about zero trust and cyber kill chain, a bunch of different frameworks. And it's from a great guy. Rick's funny and a nice guy, and really, really great book. I recommend it.
Amir has to think, huh?
Yeah.
That's
Pick
that's
one.
probably the toughest question in the podcast.
That's a good question. Pick one book. Wow.
You can name two if you can't pick,
Yeah, I think I have two, because like from different approaches, it ties into the like hard and soft skills in a way. But one would be the pragmatic programmer, and I think it's a really good book in creating a good approach of what it means to be a good engineer. Because oftentimes I hear the question of how can I be better as an individual contributor, as an engineer, and I think it gives a lot of good practices on how to approach the craft of software engineering. And the other one is actually a book from, I think from the 80s, but it's very relevant. It's called Peopleware. It's about managing people in the software industries. It's a book I really love. I usually buy it for first-time team leaders who are starting out to lead and manage people. I really recommend and love the book.
Okay, great. I'll definitely recommend our development team to read that. Well, thank you so much for coming on both on the podcast and sharing your pieces of advice with everyone. And it was really great episode, and I hope you enjoyed as well. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Alexander. I'm glad that we could be here for your first multi-guest podcast. And of course, I'd like to thank Amir as well for joining me today. We wanted to talk about non-human identity. I'm happy to talk about it from my perspective, but it's great to have a subject matter expert to come on and really tell us the details. So thanks, Amir.
Yeah, thank you both. Happy to join. It was a really fun conversation about this topic, which obviously I like. Great to talk about it.
Good. Thank you.